Welcome back aboard Strange Express. My name is Dr. Scherzo Stantio. On today's journey, I'll share the second part of the story, The Vampire. If you've not seen part 1, you may want to go back and watch that video first. If so, you may want to disembark soon, as I believe I just heard the engineer give the signal that we're about to be on our way. Chapman did not come until the next day. When he got there, Nathan met him before he got to the door. Chapman, still sporting the fedora, was wearing a gray suit today, but it looked like the same blue tie. He extended his hand to Nathan with a medium-sized manila envelope. Nathan greeted Chapman. "I got the impression that Mr. Hunter was in a hurry for me to get this. I figured you were coming last night." "No such luck, kid. He wouldn't let me bring the originals, and when I tried the Xerox, it was busted. Xerox people came this morning, so this was the quickest I could get to you." Chapman dropped the envelope in Nathan's hand and turned and got back into his car and left. Nathan went back into his house and went through documents in the manila envelope. As he reviewed the articles, he put together the story. Amy Hunter, wife of Morris Hunter, millionaire, was the victim of a grisly murder. The murdered woman had been found in her home by her husband, who had just returned from the West Coast on business. According to the story, Hunter had spoke to her the evening before to let her know he was headed home and should be there Saturday afternoon. The medical examiner estimated the time of death to be in the morning hours on Saturday. Then Nathan realized that the date that Mrs. Hunter was killed was August the 7th, 1976, the same day that Isaiah was killed. Nathan called Mr. Hunter and arranged to meet him at his home. Nathan made the drive to Mr. Hunter's home. The entrance to his estate looked like a jungle. The house was set back in this jungle. It was a very large house that reminded Nathan of homes built by Frank Lloyd Wright. The front of the house was a large glass facade. Through this facade, you could look directly into the house. Apparently, the front room was a living room, family room, or TV room, with a corner sofa with 4 matching chairs and a love seat. Across from the seating was a television set, which was on, but there was no one in the room watching it. The room was also illuminated with a lamp that stood in the corner, and several recessed lights in the ceiling. With all the openness of the house, it was little wonder that Mr. Hunter surrounded the house with jungle foliage. On the right side of the house, past the room with all the glass, was a carport. There was a brown Mercedes convertible parked in one half of the carport, and a large white van occupied the other half. There was no back wall to the carport, and it appeared that there was a trail that circled around the house from the carport. The entrance to the home was just left of the carport, between the carport and the glass room. Nathan exited his car and went up and pressed the illuminated doorbell button and waited. After a minute, he was met at the door by a middle-aged lady dressed in a baggy navy blue pantsuit. Her hair was piled up on top of her head in an old-fashioned bun that gave at least 6 inches to her already impressive height. She was wearing thick, rimmed cat's-eye glasses. The lady asked, "How can I help you?" The greeting seemed strange to Nathan, but he identified himself and told her that Mr. Hunter was expecting him. She looked at Nathan oddly and then said, "Please wait here a moment," and then she closed the door. After another minute or two, she came back to the door and said, "Mr. Hunter can see you now. Please follow me. I'll take you to him." Nathan entered the foyer, and as the woman closed the door behind him, she locked the deadbolt behind her. She then proceeded down a large corridor. The shiny linoleum was so polished that you could see your reflection in it. The corridor had glass cases with different antiquities enclosed in them, ranging from ancient busts and small statues to early electronic devices like an old telegraph key and even an 18th century tellurium. Nathan remembered the words of the Addams family theme. Their house is a museum where people come to see them. He almost laughed at the thought, but he refrained. The woman noticed that Nathan had fallen behind, and she stopped and turned to Nathan and said, "Mr. Hunter is out on the conservatory. It's just ahead." Only one of the rooms along the corridor had an open door, and it appeared to be an office or study with an ornate executive's desk covered by a glass overlay. Nathan also noticed that the room was bordered on all visible sides by bookcases filled with books. The woman opened the door at the end of the corridor and ushered Nathan into the conservatory. Without speaking a word, she turned and left. The room was most impressive. It was a round room, completely enclosed in glass. It even had a glass dome. Each of the panes that made up the walls and roof of the room were framed in a very beautiful reddish wood. A large crystal chandelier hung from the ceiling. The room had a large sofa, several chairs, and juxtaposed to the sofa and chairs were two recliners that were slightly angled to face each other. A man that appeared to Nathan to be about 70 was seated in one of the recliners, and off to the side of the recliner was a wheelchair. Nathan presumed that the man was Mr. Hunter and walked over to the man and extended his hand. "Mr. Hunter?" Nathan asked. "Yes, I'm Norris Hunter," the man answered, "but please just call me Norris." Nathan noticed that when he shook his hand that Mr. Hunter, Norris, had a surprisingly firm grip. Nathan replied, "I'll try to remember that, but if I forget, please don't be offended." "I won't, and I'll just call you Nathan." Nathan started to offer a clever answer, but decided against it and said, "Yes, sir, that'll be fine. You have a very beautiful home here. This room is especially beautiful with all the wood and the glass." "Yes, I like this room very much too," Norris replied. "The wood is actually mahogany, which I had specially imported. Did you know that in many cultures wood is considered to have magical properties?" Then Norris Hunter, noticing that Nathan was still standing, said, "Please sit in that chair that is across from me." Norris said, indicating to the other recliner, "I hope Ella was not too gruff with you. She's been my personal assistant for a very long time now, and she can be very protective of me." Nathan answered as he sat down, "No, she did not seem unfriendly to me. Maybe a little cautious, but I can understand that." "That's good," Norris Hunter answered. "I just didn't want us to get started off on the wrong foot. So, let's get down to cases. Nathan, how old do you think I am?" Nathan felt awkward, but he tried to be diplomatic. 70-ish? Norris Hunter smiled. "Would you believe I haven't even hit 60 yet?" "I'm sorry, Norris. I'm not very good at guessing people's ages." "That's okay," Norris responded. "Very few people can guess my age correctly. The reason that I ask is that I want you to know why I contacted you. My health is deteriorating. After my wife was murdered, my life fell apart, and of recent I've had some health issues. I'm at the end, but I have unfinished work, and I'm in no condition to complete it. As you no doubt noticed, my wife was murdered on the same day that your cousin was murdered. I had seen the news of your cousin's death in the news, and I checked with the sheriff's detectives, as I believe the murders were done by the same person. They told me that they too had thought of this, but they felt that the killer would not have had time to get from my house to where you were, especially as you had indicated that the man that killed your cousin was on foot. You see, they knew what time your cousin was killed, as you were present and gave them the time, and they're fairly certain of the time that my wife was murdered. And they said to get from my house to where your cousin was killed, the killer would not have been able to drive within that time frame." "Were you living here when your wife was murdered?" Nathan asked. "Yes," Norris replied. "We've lived here since 1968. I believe I could drive from here to there in less than an hour." "Today?" Norris replied. "There's no doubt that you could. But back in 1976 there was no highway, and half the roads were not even paved, and some were not much more than a sand path. Even the road you live on today was a clay road back then, and it was not until they paved it around 1978 that they took all the curves out of it. No, I tried driving it back then, and the detectives were right. There was no way he could have driven from my house over to Autry Hill Cemetery, made his way back to the southeast corner of the cemetery by 7 a.m. Also, you said the man that killed your cousin was on foot. Now, Nathan, there are some things I'm not telling you yet, because when I do tell you, you may think I'm insane. After I investigated my wife's murder for several months, I was hospitalized due to exhaustion. I had been trying to look for the killer and continue to run my import-export business. I was only sleeping between 3 or 4 hours a day. That is when I hired the Nolan Detective Agency. I requested that they watch for similar murders throughout the country. What they found was amazing. They found more than a dozen murders throughout the country that were similar. Most of the victims were women or children, and most had lost significant amounts of blood. But they were not finding the murder scene particularly bloody, so where was all the blood going? Police developed a theory that it was some kind of evil cult and that they were collecting blood for some ritual. I, on the other hand, believed that it was a lone individual, and I asked my detectives to base their search on that theory. Soon they noticed a pattern. The murderer appeared to be traveling by rail because many of the murders occurred within 2 miles of major railway lines. They tried to see if they could find where the murderer purchased his tickets, using a check or credit. They knew it was possible that it was a cash transaction, and as a result, there would be no way to track it. Or, as one of the detectives suggested to me, that the killer was a tramp or a hobo and didn't purchase a ticket. It was only when I saw the article in the newspaper a couple of weeks ago about you finding the 22 that I thought about another possibility. I knew it was a long shot, but I had the detectives look for any type of freight that was being shipped by rail to the locations where the murders occurred. Nathan was puzzled. What made you think of that? Nathan, as I mentioned, I believe that the same person that murdered my wife also killed your cousin. The fact that the person that you and your cousin pursued was headed for the cemetery, the fact that he left the rifle in an old mausoleum where it had been interred for over 30 years, made me believe that the killer was either someone insane that lived in the cemetery or someone possessed or something worse. Do you believe, Nathan volunteered, that the killer is a vampire? Yes, Norris answered. I drew that conclusion. I followed up with additional investigation. The detectives found that the individual was having a coffin-sized crate shipped by rail to each of the cities where most of the murders occurred. When I saw that being grabbed by Isaiah that morning, his mouth was open, and I thought I saw fangs. I never mentioned this to anybody because it all happened so fast. I thought maybe it just looked that way due to the darkness at the time. Nathan, I believe that the fact that it was the dawning is the only thing that saved your life. Within 3 days of your encounter with him, he had his unmarked coffin shipped out of state. I don't know if he does it himself or if he has people under his control that do it for him, although I suspect the latter. But he has been able to get his coffin shipped from city to city, kills 1 or 2 people, and then moves on again. It may be months before he strikes again. Authorities have labeled him as a serial killer, but they have not discovered how he moves from area to area. Shouldn't we let him know? Nathan asked. I thought about it, but I decided against it for 2 reasons. First, if I tell him that the serial killer is actually a vampire and he has his coffin shipped from city to city via railroad, they'll probably send the guys with the straitjackets after me. Secondly, assuming that they did go after him, they would attempt to capture him, and I have no doubt that he wouldn't be captured and would probably kill or injure anyone who attempted to do so. No, somebody that understands what he is and what he's capable of will need to go after him. Nathan asked him, why don't you put your detectives on the job? Because Nolan already thinks I'm crazy because I did tell him that the killer is a vampire. If I tell him that I believe I know where he is, he'll go along with me long enough to find out the location, and then he'll turn the information over to the police. In the end, the monster will escape, and I'll have to start over trying to track him down. While it's not a problem locating where these grisly murders occur, it costs lives, and that's what I'm trying to avoid. Anyone that risks their life trying to stop him should be fully aware of what he's dealing with, and the possibility that death awaits him. That is why I wanted to talk to you. I want your help in destroying the killer. Are you willing to listen to my proposal? Yes, Nathan answered. I thank you for that. The monster goes under the name of Raul Valakari. My sources tell me that he's gone under other names, but has mainly used the name of Raul Valakari since he came to the United States back in the middle of the 19th century. He has a history of killing a few people, then disappearing for up to 8 months or more, and then turning up in another part of the country to kill again. Nathan asked, how can he go so long without food? Blood is not a food for a vampire. Vampires are essentially animated corpses. They have no need of food, nor can they be killed in the true sense of the word, as they are not living, in the sense that you think of living. They are in a unique state referred to as undead, Norris replied. Then, if it is not food, why do they kill people and drink their blood? I will explain, Norris answered, and then he leaned back in his chair and took a breath while he collected his thoughts. First of all, they drink their blood before they actually kill them. Terrorizing their victims is important to them. It is all a part of the ancient ritual that is sometimes called blood magic. Drinking blood is a way for the vampires to get more and more power, Taking the blood from innocents has long been a way for evil to get power from Satan. Even in times of old, the devil called for blood of the innocent in exchange for power or secret knowledge. I refer you to a passage in Psalms. Yea, they sacrificed their sons and their daughters unto devils, and shed innocent blood, even the blood of their sons and their daughters, whom they sacrificed unto the idols of Canaan, and the land was polluted with blood. Satan encourages the taking of human life in all forms as it moves him closer to his goal of destroying humanity. Nathan interrupted, why would Satan want to kill all humans? To simplify it, it boils down to jealousy. Satan and the angels that followed him in the rebellion against God were cast out of heaven, and as a result of their former status and their knowledge, they stand condemned, with no hope of redemption. But humanity, at least those who are alive, can be redeemed. Death is the dividing line. Those who die unredeemed, like Raoul Valakari, their fate is sealed the same way that Satan is in his followers. You also said that he cannot be killed, but I thought you could kill a vampire by driving a wooden stake through its heart. Let me clarify this for you, Norris began. Driving a stake through a vampire's heart, or cutting off their head, will deactivate a vampire. However, at some point someone can come along at a later time and using some of that blood magic, reactivate the vampire. That is why I've sought and I found a way to remove the beast to a realm where blood magic has no power. And once there, reactivating him will be impossible. With regard to the stake through the heart or beheading a vampire, it is much like the proverbial bearding the lion. Many have died in the attempt, as they assume that the vampires sleep during the day. But, like food, vampires do not require sleep. Your death is almost a certainty if you open a vampire's coffin and greet it with an axe or wooden stake, and your effort will have been wasted. Vampires are extremely fast, and more than one vampire hunter has found themselves impaled on their own stake. Now, vampires avoid the sun as it causes them severe pain, and if they are out in it too long, it can scar them and even cause permanent deformities. But as far as I know, it will not kill them. I have, at no small expense, found a trap to stop this vampire for once and for all. The problem is I need to bait the trap to lure the prey. I want to use you as the bait in my trap. Now, don't say anything yet, but let me tell you what I propose. I've obtained what is known as a chest of souls. No one knows when or where it was built. It is built of acacia wood. It has no markings to indicate who built it. I imported it from Italy, but prior to that it is known to have been all over the European continent, and at one time in parts of the Middle East and even Asia. It's reported that Heinrich Himmler very nearly obtained it in the late 1930s. It has power to completely annihilate a vampire, but it requires magic for it to do so. There are certain rules that you must follow for it to work. Also, the person that works the magic has to accept grave personal risk. I will be that person. Nathan interrupted. What does it do? Does it absorb the vampire's soul? Norris smiled. No, the name is a bit of a misnomer, at least in the case of a vampire. The vampire's soul belongs to Satan, and he, in fact, already possesses it. No, the chest simply absorbs the physical manifestation. When it is done, there will be no body, no bones, not even any dust to be reactivated. As I said, complete annihilation. Nathan interjected again. If it is so powerful, what do you need me for? Why can't you just walk into his lair, do whatever you need to do with the chest, and get rid of the vampire? Norris sighed. I wish it could be that simple. As I said before, in magic, there are certain rules that must be followed. Deviation can have dire results. For example, did you know a vampire cannot enter your abode without your permission? Nathan said, all my knowledge about vampires comes from Bela Lugosi, Christopher Lee, and some of the old Hammer films. But no, I don't remember hearing that. Norris smiled again. It's true, Valakari would not have molested you or your cousin if you'd stayed in your tent that morning, unless you'd invited them in. But the moment you stepped out of the tent, you literally made yourself fair game. Here's what I plan to do. I believe that Valakari is currently in Georgia. He's in this fairly small town that is close to a packing house. I've checked into it, and there are 12 graveyards or cemeteries in the city. Most of them are small family cemeteries. As far as I can find out, only one has any mausoleums. I want to put you in a tent either in or near the cemetery. I want to leave the outer flap open so you can see him and he can see you. Norris, I'm not sure that I'm comfortable with your plan at this point. I can understand that, but I assure you he will not enter the tent unless you allow him to. And once you have spoken to him and told him your proposal, you will let him in. You'll tell him that you want to become a vampire, and you will remind him of that morning that you first saw him at Altar Hill. You will tell him that both you and Isaiah camped near the graveyard then because both of you want to become vampires, and that you want his help. Only when he says that he will help you will you let him in. Once he's inside, do not look at him. Not his eyes, not his hands, not even his feet. Do not look at him at all. Stay busy by doing things like rolling up your sleeping bag, like you're making more room. But do not look at him. He will likely say that he has something that he wants you to look at, but do not look at it. You'll start talking about how you always wanted to be a vampire. You'll have to lay it on thick and convince him that you really want to become a vampire. Or you can talk about anything that will hold his attention for about 2 minutes. The tent has a second room, and I'll be in the second room preparing the chest of souls. He will likely know that I'm there. Hopefully he'll pay more attention to you and not to me. After about 2 minutes, you'll tell him that you've brought him a present. You'll show him the chest of souls, which I will have encased in a cardboard box so that it appears to be a box with a gift in it. When he begins to lift the lid of the box, you'll need to be ready, but don't jump the gun. When he opens the box, there will be a fire that will totally consume Valakari. You'll need to dive out the door of the tent, as the tent will no doubt catch fire. Nathan asks, "What about you? How will you get out?" Norris looked perplexed for a moment, but answered, "I will cut an opening in the back or the side of the tent, and I will make my way out that way." "But aren't you in a wheelchair?" Nathan said, looking at the wheelchair that was parked behind him. "The wheelchair is for my use to help me save my strength, but I am fully capable of walking if I need to." Then Nathan asked, "Are you certain that this chest of souls will work as you expect?" Norris paused to contemplate how to answer Nathan. "I trust the person that assisted me in attaining the chest of souls. She would not mislead me on purpose. I was able to render her a very great service many years ago, so I do not believe she would betray me. Now I'm going to ask if you will help me. I do not ask you this in the name of revenge. We've both lost people who were dear to us, but nothing will bring them back. Neither do I ask you to do this in the name of justice, even though he does deserve it. But I believe he will receive true justice from God. I do ask you to help me in the name of prevention. I ask you in the name of all the future victims of this plague upon mankind. If you do not have an answer now, please think about it, and let me know as soon as you decide. But don't delay too long." Nathan asked, "Can I make some phone calls on your phone? I need to let everyone know that I'll be out of town for a few days." Well, I believe we need to cut off here, as the Strange Express is nearing my stop. I have to go to work. As I mentioned on a previous video, I work in a cryogenic lab storage facility. I'm the head man there. The name of our company is Icy Dead People. Thank you. Oh well, I must admit I was a little disappointed in part 2 of The Vampire. There was no vampire in it, not even a bat. I really must cry foul here. Or perhaps I should cry mammal. No, that doesn't sound very good. Well, I know the vampire has to show up again in part 3, as it will be the conclusion of this story. I hope you'll be here for the end. In the meantime, thanks for watching, and as always, happy rails to you.